part of your regular programming, but I mentioned that sycamore tree. If you all peer through this trail right here, you see that massive sycamore. The side that faces the river, it's actually bricked in. So someone bricked it in at some point. So that's the tree that, you know, the local legend states that runaway slaves were hiding in to get to freedom. So stay tuned. So under normal circumstances, and we have veterans, John's been here all the time with me, this is the first year I can remember doing an anniversary tour when I couldn't take you down there. So the river is much higher than normal, but obviously has a good current, and somebody was happy about that. You're happy, that's good, all right. You going floating or something? All right. So this is Island Ford. So this is where the Union Army crosses on the afternoon of July 18, 1864. So about 3 o'clock p.m., they're coming down that road in front of the retreat. They're traversing the ground owned by the university, and they cross here. And if you look off to the right, you can see that little piece of land jutting out. That is one of 2 islands in the Shenandoah River. And not so much that island, but the island that's north of us, Parker's Island, which we'll get a view of at our next stop. That actually figures prominently during the battle and in the aftermath of the engagement. So again, you know, the water levels, July 18, 1864, are extremely low, maybe, you know, knee height, mid-thigh at best. So this is where the Union Army is going to cross. They're going to engage with a small contingent of Confederates on the other side, Virginia regiments, and then, of course, the battle will happen shortly after that, around 5 o'clock. Now today, again, vegetation on the other side is really, really thick. Best time to come out here is wintertime, when there's no vegetation and the leaves are off the trees. And you would see very quickly how the landscape juts up. So the Union line was actually very compact. You had a Union line that hugged the riverbank, so just opposite of where we're at. There was another line about 75 yards up from that. And then you get to the crest, where you get a view of the Cool Spring Mansion. That's where Union pickets were posted initially on the late afternoon of July 18, 1864. But once the battle begins, the Union line is, for all intents and purposes, hugging that riverbank, with one major exception. And that brings us to the story of these 2 guys right here. So as the battle unfolded that afternoon and into the evening, Colonel Joseph Thoburn came to the realization very, very quickly that the Confederate focus was the far northern flank. And so he had to take soldiers from down here and move them up there. While that movement was happening, he wanted to present another challenge for Robert Rote. And so he took Colonel Robert Frost's brigade, and Frost's men are, of course, facing this way to the west, but he's actually going to wheel them so that they're going to face north. It was in the process of that wheeling that Colonel Frost was mortally wounded, shot through the bowels, and that creates all kind of panic within his brigade. So this is the panic that General Ricketts sees when he gets down here trying to find a place with Crook to cross. He sees Frost's men, Young's command, he's like, nope, not going to do it. Now, the one regiment that is not going to be facing that way or shifting to the north is the 5th New York Heavy Artillery. So the 5th New York Heavy Artillery is commanded by this guy right here, Colonel Edward Murray. Edward Murray's regiment will actually have the highest casualty rate at this battle. Even though the bulk of the severe fighting is going to happen in that direction, about 3/4 of a mile north of where we're at, his men will suffer 33% of all casualties at this battle come from this regiment. And here is why. As all of these shifts and maneuvers are taking place that afternoon and evening, Gabriel Wharton is launching attacks of his own to try to prevent these attacks. The 5th New York, on multiple occasions, will launch assault after assault after assault into Wharton's division to try to prevent them from keeping soldiers here or getting behind Frost's command. So they are the sacrificial lamb, in essence, at this battle for Thoburn's command. During the course of the fighting that day, Colonel Murray is shot twice. Shot in the wrist. That's not so severe. The wound that is severe is the one he gets in the back, near his kidney. That wound debilitates him. His men are unable to evacuate him from the battlefield. So he is laying over there, not far from where we're at, on the night of July 18th. That night, this guy right here, Lieutenant Leonidas Polk of the 43rd North Carolina, is walking around the battlefield with another officer from that regiment, Captain Carey Whitaker, and they are looking for wounded men from their command. They're looking for their friends, they're looking for their comrades. Well, as Polk is walking around the battlefield, he finds Colonel Murray writhing in agony on the ground. For Colonel Murray, this is a bittersweet moment, because he knows that when Polk finds him, he is going to become a prisoner of war. That's the bitter part. The sweet part is this is his best chance for survival. So Polk captures him. But immediately after capture, he sends him to a Confederate field hospital, closer to the Cool Spring mansion. Doctors will tend to him. He'll be sent to Winchester, and then eventually he'll be sent to Richmond. He spends the next 8 months of the war in Libby Prison. Prisoner of war camps are never a great place. You don't want to be sent there from either side. But it is there that Confederate surgeons tend to Colonel Murray's wounds. And it's because of that that he survives the wound and is able to go back home to New York. Now, on the morning of July 19th, after Murray has been stabilized and is ready for transport eventually to Libby Prison, Colonel Murray recognizes the important role that Polk has played in saving his life. So he decides to give him a gift, a gesture, a token of his appreciation. And if you look closely at this photograph, you see this belt that Murray is wearing? That is the gift that Murray gives to Polk. And so he writes him a note. You know, it's a real brief note, but basically, you know, I extend to you my deepest, sincerest thanks for saving my life. Please accept this as a token of my appreciation. Polk does. Polk will wear that belt for the rest of the war. He keeps it as a cherished item, not as a war trophy, like, haha, I captured a Union colonel, but I saved this guy's life. Now, after the war was over, Polk goes back home to North Carolina, and in the mid part of the 1870s, he decides that he's going to revisit his wartime experiences and start writing articles about them for a local newspaper in Anson, North Carolina. So as he's going throughout the chronology of his wartime service, he comes to the Battle of Cool Spring, and he wonders, as he looks at the belt, I wonder whatever happened to this guy. Did he survive? Did he make it out of Libby? Is he back home in New York? So he's writing all kinds of letters to veterans organizations like the Grand Army of the Republic, political officials in New York, and eventually he is able to make contact with Colonel Murray's wife in 1876. Unfortunately, what his wife tells Polk is not good news. The Colonel Murray has died. He died just shortly before Polk's letter arrived. From that moment forward, Polk decided he wanted to establish a connection with Colonel Murray's family. So he went to New York City, 1885. He met with the family. They spent several days together, reminiscing, talking about the war, talking about Colonel Murray. And after he left New York, he made an offer to the family, and it was this: do you want the belt back? And the family said no. You know, Colonel Murray gave it to you as a token of his gratitude and appreciation. We want you to have it. Well, that changes 7 years later. So after Mrs. Murray passed away, Colonel Murray's children and grandchildren in 1892 are like, you know what, we'd like to have Dad's belt. And so they wrote a letter in the late spring of 1892 to Polk saying, could we have it back? And he's like, absolutely. It belongs to you. It belongs to your family. And so he packaged it up, sent it off, and then about 3 weeks later in early June, Polk passed away. So you think about the timing of all of this, that if he didn't, send it at that moment, it could have been lost. It could have ended up at the horse soldier or something for sale. Who knows? And it's my understanding that belt is still with the family. Now, Colonel Murray was one of about 60 Union soldiers who was captured at the Battle of Cool Spring. And we are fortunate today to have a descendant of another Union soldier who was captured at this battle from the 34th Massachusetts, Sebastian Trable. It's not the greatest likeness that I printed out. Probably shouldn't have printed out in yellow cardstock, but that's all I had. But I'd like to invite Jim Miller, the great-grandson of Sebastian Trable, to share his story.
Hi, everybody. So Sebastian Trable was a German immigrant. He was born in Bavaria, 1837. He already had an uncle who was living in western Massachusetts in Berkshire County. So Sebastian and his sister traveled across the Atlantic by ship, and they settled in Berkshire County, Massachusetts. If you look at the Massachusetts, Boston is at one end, Berkshire County is the other end. It's part of Massachusetts that borders with New York State, Vermont, and Connecticut. It's really far west and all the way up to those other states. So Sebastian was there in the spring of 1862 after the Union Army under McClellan was defeated in the 7 days battle at Richmond. They pulled back, and Lincoln says, we need more soldiers. So Lincoln asked for 100,000 more Union soldiers, and part of that 100,000 was the 34th Massachusetts. So my great-grandfather enlisted in September of 1862. Jonathan mentioned the fortifications around Washington. The 34th Massachusetts helped build some of them. They helped build Fort Willard. They were near Fort Lyon. If you ever search online 34th Massachusetts, you'll see a picture of them just down from Fort Lyon. And they stayed there for almost 10 months. But in October of 1864, the regiment was transferred to Harper's Ferry. And they were in Harper's Ferry that summer. They fought in Charlestown. There was a battle, sometimes called Ripon. Do you say Ripon?
Ripon.
Ripon, in October of 1864. And then, even before then, they were at, the 34th Massachusetts was in the battle at Newmarket and the Battle of Piedmont. After Piedmont, they went on this enormous excursion. They went to Stanton. They went to, what's the city in, not Roanoke, but
Lexington?
Lynchburg. Where now there's a Union Army behind Lee, who's now still in Richmond, and so Lee sends soldiers under Early to come out to the valley. So at that point, the 34th Massachusetts heads west. They cross the Blue Ridge. They go all the way to the Ohio River, and they go up the Ohio River to Parkersburg, which is in West Virginia today. It was still Virginia. Well, no, it was by then 1864. It was part of West Virginia, and then they march back to Harper's Ferry from there. So they walk into Harper's Ferry after this enormous roundabout excursion. The article in the magazine is called "The Great Skedaddle." So Early at this point, it's going up the valley, down the valley, headed to Washington, where they're circling around out here. And they get back to Harper's Ferry, and they no sooner get back, and they said, you've got to go up the Shenandoah. So the 34th marches to the battle, to Cool Spring, and they come through Snicker's Gap, they come down to the river, and then they cross here, and my great-grandfather goes across, and either at that point or later in that same day, he's captured on the west side of the Shenandoah, and he will be a prisoner for 4 months in Lynchburg. As Jonathan mentioned, not something, if you could avoid being a prisoner, that's probably what you'd want to do. But he was in prison for 4 months, and then he was released, went back through Richmond, and then reunited with his company probably in November of 1864, and he served again with the 34th at Petersburg, where he was wounded. So, although the 34th was at Appomattox, I don't know if my great-grandfather was there or he was catching up with them. But he survived the war. Being a prisoner probably left most people who went through that experience with bitter memories of hunger, although the soldiers were probably no more hungry than the people who ran the prisons. There was a shortage of food. That's what the Union Army had been doing in Virginia, is destroying as much of the crops as they could. So by the time my great-grandfather got back to Massachusetts, he was in bad shape. He could not see well. He lost vision both his eyes. He may have had what's called trachoma. That's the most common cause of loss of vision, even to this day. So he may have caught trachoma, or he may just have had something else go with his eyes. But he was given he had both a Massachusetts pension, and then he was in this National Soldiers Home in Togus, Maine. He died in 1901, and he is buried in North Adams, Massachusetts, and his gravestone has the 34th Massachusetts on his gravestone. So I've been searching him for a long time, and I don't have all the story figured out yet, because his obituary said that he was in the Grand Army of the Republic, but I'm not sure, because I got in touch with the Grand Army of the Republic and they said that his application was rejected. So yet to figure out what happened. I know he may have had a drinking problem. He may have had some kind of post-traumatic stress and acted that out with alcohol, but I don't know. Anyway, he lived in 1901, and then I'm descended from his family.
And once Jim figures out those little loose ends, he's working on an article for our Journal of the Shenandoah Valley during the Civil War era. So stay tuned for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions before we head that way?